To ITAD in 15. I'm Steve from Adisa. And today joining me is Daniel Smith of RDC, or I should say, is Computer Center Circular Services, and John Woodward from Envision Marketing. Is correct, John? Your new company?
That is correct. Yes.
But John is a stalwart from days at Ultratech. And then clearly Restore after that as well. So thank you, gentlemen, for joining me today. Our topic clearly is quite important for those companies in the UK, where we're going to be talking about data sanitization in the UK and the standards and schemes that people can look to place their trust in. Now, Dan, you're an expert in this area at RDC because you were responsible for compliance and getting certified to some of these schemes. Just outline for the people on the call today, and what schemes are currently available in the UK.
So there's a variety. Thank you, Steve. We've got mainly the government schemes IS5, which was written back in 2014. Then feeding off of that, you've got the NCSC with their CAS-S scheme. You've got the MPSA now with their standard as well. So that used to be the Centre for Protection of National Infrastructure. They remodeled a couple of years ago. So that's on the government side of it. On the industrial side of it, we've got IEEE 2883, which has come out recently, which is closely linked with the NIST standard, which is in the US standard, 800-88. And also, it depends on how far you look and what countries you're looking. You've got standards like DIN 66399, which is a destruction standard, which is the German standard. You've got ISO 21964, which is an international standard that feeds off of the same criteria as DIN. Very similar. And then you've got the security industry BSEN 15713, which again is a destruction standard because that feeds and references 21964 even. Again, that's destruction. So in terms of sanitization, you're really only left with NIST, IS5, which, like we said, is already government, which is kind of outdated, and IEEE, which we're just starting to learn about and try to understand now.
So let's lead into destruction versus reuse, because there's a load of standards, acronyms, and we're going to delve into some of them in detail. So Dan, thanks for outlining the various ones there, and they can be confusing. John, because I know we've worked on a couple of these, let's talk reuse standards and certifications for product. What experience have you got taking products through those processes? What's currently available for a software sanitization company?
At the moment, there's a number. Obviously, Adisa run their own standards as well, so we'll include those. Yeah. But we've got common criteria, which is a standard been rolled out in Europe, and I've spent some time looking into that, and that's certainly challenging in a number of ways, and I think we can get into that in a little bit. And then really, it's NIST, and certainly the one that we've seen more fit for purpose than anything else is NIST. And again, it can be self-certified, I guess, to a point, in that it's a framework that you have to make sure your product is compliant with, rather than something like common criteria, where you have to have an external body certify and test your product. Now, obviously, in my past, we used Adisa as an independent body, so at least we could go to market saying that we'd been independently certified rather than self-certified. But in terms of products now, those are really the only main two that are available. Historically, as we know, and Steve, you probably know better than I do on these, there's a ton of other standards in the past that were there, but in most cases they're all defunct now, either because government bodies have changed and moved on, or they've just become, let's say, beyond use.
So let's join them together now. So we've got in the UK, Dan, picking up, you mentioned IS5, Information Assurance Standard number 5. 2014, it was tied into the protective marking scheme. So it was relevant for UK Gov data only, really. And it talked about the environment which products were to be released into. So an equivalent security environment within government, an equivalent commercial environment, or any environment. So in the ITAD market space, typically you're only focused on the the treatments which were in any environment, and they were reuse and destroy. And what we looked for IS5 compliance, because it's a pretty damn good standard as you'd expect to come out of GCHQ, what we looked for were products that could meet the reuse requirement. And typically, this was the scheme that NCSE stood up called CPA, a Commercial Product Assurance Scheme. Now, CPA stopped new applications for products in about, only other than smart meters, in about December 2022. And Blanco's was the last approved product, and it lapsed in September. So currently, if you're looking at the UK landscape, we have IS5, still current, old, 2014, and the products that you could be used to evidence compliance to that were CPA, and those schemes have now died. So where do you go, Dan, as a government supplier, if you like, or supplier of services to government, where you're looking to try and evidence compliance with these standards? Is there any option for you at the moment?
There's no defined option for us to stand by. We did struggle last year working with this CAS-S scheme, the NCSE, and it is now just a destruction only standard. So the difference between that and this what is the MPSA is now minimal, because that's a destruction standard anyway, because Annex A talks about destruction outcomes for all the different types of data media. So in terms of actual sanitisation, and when you're trying to answer the RFPs now, you're trying to answer them in a positive manner and try and explain at the same time what the situation is, and that there isn't a definitive answer.
And let's draw that customer into the equation now. So we're talking about government schemes, so IS5, CPA, which is a component of that, that's gone. CAS-S, which was meant to be the certification of the service to IS5, and that's now just a destruction process. We're seeing tenders coming out saying you must be compliant with, and we all see all sorts of things, HMG, IS5 and things like that. But then they're asking you for rebates, and yet it's a destruction requirement that they're specifying. Are we seeing a lot of this, John, in your experience? Are you seeing lots of tenders coming out with the wrong type of specification?
I think certainly what I'm picking up on, not necessarily the wrong one, they're what they know of and what historically they've used. And I guess the issue is the government body or the corporate body, whoever they might well be, are going off an RFQ that they've maybe written before. It's been used, was deemed as fit for purpose at that point in time, and either the standard obviously isn't relevant anymore, or also the other thing, which was something that we had issues with, because we had a fairly new product, our product wasn't certified to the older standards, because you can't get them certified, and we know with the CPA taking new products on, you can't get a product certified. So suddenly there's a chunk of, be it software or erasure solutions, that certainly can't be used because they were never certified at that point in time. So as Daniel's eloquently said, the problem is also, if the standard isn't relevant to the product, but it's not also relevant to what the customers want, there's a massive void in between. And that's where it seems to be now where things are falling.
And can we pick up on that? Because even the CPA scheme, it's a CPA, for those who don't know, it's run by NCSE, and products which were approved to it pointed at something called the security characteristics, which is the specification for how those software products were meant to operate in order to sanitize media. Now, it was only on magnetic hard drives, so the CPA approval was only on magnetic hard drives, not flash-based. There were characteristics for flash, but they were virtually impossible to comply with because of degraded cells. So there were no flash-based approvals, to the best of my knowledge anyway. So the limitations, even before when these schemes were live, was still there. So it was only on magnetic media. And again, when you're seeing the type of equipment which is being released, they're not just spinning discs. There are lots of different technologies. And so specifications that, even if they were still live, were still very limited. And Dan, were you able in your role, because you're the security controller at RDC as well, Computer Center Circular Services, were you able to challenge your customers and say, look, the specification is not what you're after?
It's a difficult process to do that. Very often, you can get through to people at the NCSE and the MPSA. There is a level of contact there. It's not great, but there is a small open channel. But it's other departments. When you're doing RFPs, there's several out which are due in over the next few weeks, which are large government departments. And actually being able to have a chat with them and a dialogue is not possible. You have your clarification questions, which everybody has access to, which is absolutely fair and right. But you can't actually make your point about what they're asking for. So that it's proving very, very difficult. And we need that line of communication into these departments, or they need central guidance.
And it's that central guidance that I want to move us on to a little bit, because 15 minutes is a short time, just to frame where we are now, which is if I'm a business in the UK, whether it's an ITAD vendor or even a software vendor in the UK or anywhere else wanting to sell into the UK, and I'm wanting to meet customer expectation, I'm looking to what those specifications are, and those specifications are impossible to comply with. CPA is shut. IS5 2014, it's out of date, only on magnetic hard drives. So all of a sudden you've got a vacuum. How do we bridge that gap? Because doing it deal by deal, client by client, is going to be really time consuming. And also, who do they trust? You're just another vendor selling me the story that you want to sell because it's what you sell as a product or service. Where do they go, John? Where is the thought leadership in this space, do you think?
Well, I guess as an industry, we need to maybe control the narrative a little bit there too. And I think certainly, there needs to be an engagement process with a customer. Maybe this is a framework that needs to be created in some way where we're looking at, what the customer is looking to achieve from a data security perspective, but also from a sustainability point of view. Because as we said, shredding everything, okay, it's absolute in terms of security, but from a sustainability point of view, it's not where we want to be. And vice versa. There are certain products that we know won't fit in a sustainability model. Maybe destruction is the only model. So it's a case of understanding exactly what the customer is, where they sit within that risk factor against the sustainability play, and coming up then with something that is fit for purpose. And I guess this kind of goes back to, be it the ITAD, from a sales and marketing point of view, of us asking our customers, what is it they're looking to actually achieve? What is their end goal? And then finding something that is fit for purpose. So I've always said it's great when you're at the point where you're helping the customer write the RFQ, because you can steer it in terms of what's best for them, but also best to, for the industry. And I think we need to, try and find a way where we can do that. Maybe that's something that ADISA can play a part in terms of creating some sort of framework that people can use, that it's a generic one that then can be adapted, on a customer by customer basis.
I think that's interesting. We're going to come back to explore that in a second. I'm not going to ignore that question there. I just want to go back as well, because you mentioned, Dan, IEEE 2883 and I think NIST 888. So if we're looking at where help exists today, before we try and reinvent the wheel, again, just to reiterate, you've got CPA, which is this, there's no longer any approved products. You've got IS5, which was the specification is aging. You've got MPSA, which is destruction only. 15713 destruction only. Again, backed off to the DIN standards. You've got ISO 21964 destruction only. So if we're looking for reuse, sustainability is the key today. All of those were destruction standards, or actually not open for business. NIST 888 was from 2014, and it was out of the National Institute of Science and Technology, and it was a guidelines, not a standard, for how data sanitization could be applied to different storage media by product type, interface, and whether you wanted a different level of sanitization: clear, purge, or destroy. Now, IEEE 2883 came out in November 2022. And that is an enhancement of NIST 888, but it follows the same logic. Are you seeing, Dan, that customers are beginning to look elsewhere from their traditional environment in the UK? Are they beginning to talk about IEEE 2883 and historically NIST 888?
Yeah, I think we've seen quite a lot of NIST 888 over the last 5 years. It's become more prevalent, and I think IEEE is now starting to join that conversation. We saw it at the back end of last year. I don't remember seeing anything before sort of like September last year around it, but we've certainly seen that talked about. Our commercial customers are much more aware, much more on the ball with that sort of thing, so we can have a direct conversation with them. They ask us and discuss what the benefits would be, and we can work with them on that. So yeah, we're definitely seeing it's because it is a guideline coming out that there is something for them to work to. They themselves can understand that, they can assess it, they can do the risk analysis and say, yeah, this is for us.
And I'm just going to explore that because, John, you've taken products through this type of thing before. Now, I can see Joe Mount is on the chat as well. So Joe hasn't had his official approval now, but we've just finished testing his products against IEEE 2883, which is a pass. Congratulations, Joe. The official bit's coming out tomorrow, I think. IEEE 2883, just for those who may not know, is a standard based at the US. But it looks at logical sanitization. So it looks at how software should use inbuilt features within firmware of drives to enact a function of the drive, be it a crypto arrays or a secure arrays or whatever it may be. Now, that part is very, very smart. It's an enhancement of NIST 888, but not a massive step change, but it's still the best that we see worldwide in terms of logical sanitization. The destruction piece from IEEE, Dan, I actually disagree with. And I was mentioning this to John Michael, because they don't allow shredding anymore. And they view that from a perceived vulnerability for data recovery from shredded NAND cells, from decapsulation, or from platter level recovery. That's technically possible. And I know Phil's got some experience in this area, but it's very unlikely in my view from an ITAD environment. And that's why we at Adisa have, and I'm not trying to avoid your question, John, I'm going to loop back around. That's why we at Adisa have changed our data capability requirements for our certification standard 8. And Dan, you've got a meeting with me in 2 more hours because you're on the committee for the final sign off, which we spent 6 months tweaking what we look for, because we're adopting IEEE 2883 and NIST 888 from a logical side because they're virtually the same. But we are adapting it because we're still going to allow shredding and other physical means of deformation of the storage media. And I think that's, going back to you, John, that's kind of the best thing that Adisa can do, I feel, because every client's tender and their requirements will be different. What they're looking for is to build in a specification for something which is a non-negotiable. I want my data sanitized. And if we can make that non-negotiable piece easy for them to specify without really having to understand it, so you have to build credibility in both from a business perspective, but also from a technical perspective. But if we can build that, the rest of the tender, Dan, you may disagree with that, largely becomes more commercial based. And that's an interesting dynamic for me, because then it's an even playing field. Can you comply with this specification? Yes, through certification, Joe, things like that. Therefore, the rest of it now becomes more about what you can do for me, and then it's a fair playing field. So I know we're running out of time, but I do want to explore this a little bit. NIST 888, Dan, you said you've seen it the last few years. It was actually launched in 2014, so there's a bit of a delta for the pickup on it. What we're seeing as well is that I have heard, although I don't directly know this, that NIST 888 is being reviewed, and that the rumor, and I have this third hand, is that they are going to themselves point to IEEE 2883. And the idea is that, and I think this is brilliant, by the way, I think they're trying to take away the ambiguity of which one. So they're going to absorb or point to IEEE 2883. So in other words, it will be the requirement, whether it's got the umbrella of NIST 888 over the top of it or not, the actual specification will be the same. It's going to make all of our lives much easier, because you won't be comparing two different standards allegedly trying to achieve the same thing. So there's hope there, I think, for us now. I'm aware of time. These are meant to be 15. I'm just going to try and I've done a bit of talking in it. I'm just going to try and wrap it up a little bit, but I want you to interject. Current status in the UK, because that was the premise we've got everybody here today. There's nowhere for us to point. IS5, which was always the umbrella specification in the UK, is aging, 10 years old. It's also aligned to the protective marking scheme, so it's only relevant if you do sit on that scale. And it only talks about reuse and destroy in any environment. It doesn't allow reuse at all for flash-based media. So even if there was an approved product,
which does cover a lot of other products, not just flash drives, be it networking equipment or whatever.
And so even itself, in the best will in the world, it was always not anti-sustainability, but it was always going to be a challenge. We then look at CPA, which are the approved products. They're not open for business unless you're a smart meter. So there's no approved products to help verify compliance with IS5. And then, of course, down the CASES scheme, which is a fantastic scheme, now only approves destruction. So that's the environment that we're in. If customers are looking for sustainability, MPSA, 15713, the DIN standards or ISO 21964, they're destruction. So those aren't going to help them. The only place for them to go then is going to be to look at these emerging standards like IEEE 2883 and to really try and embrace this properly. It's not going to be a flippant, throwaway specification. I still see DIPCOG being thrown around. DIPCOG isn't dead, by the way. Yeah, DoD5. DIPCOG's not dead. It just hasn't been audited, so it's just a waste of time largely. And that's meant to be the best possible thing. But I do think that if we are looking to solve the problem, picking up on your point, John, it's got to come from the industry. Government isn't moving in this space at all. We have things to point at. IEEE 2883, I think, is the premier reuse specification worldwide. And I think it's time for the industry now to start controlling, your word, John, the narrative, and to start promoting and helping educate the customer away from badge collecting, bloating a tender so that there's a whole bunch of superfluous requirements that just loads cost into the business. Why am I getting another type of certification? And I think it's time for the sector to take the lead. How we do that, John, any ideas?
I don't know. I think it is a case of getting together and getting certain bodies involved, be it maybe a working group between ITADs, between some of the manufacturers, be it software or hardware solutions, and certainly coming up with common goals, common pain points for people. Certainly, the last couple of years, from my perspective, certainly NIST was very much driving the demand. That's what customers were asking us for. So if IEEE is going that route and joining forces, that sounds very encouraging. And I guess then somehow promoting it within the UK sector, because obviously these are effectively US bodies, but saying, no, these are actually international standards that are fit for purpose, if that's the case.
We have, so IEEE has a European chapter. So it isn't just in the US. I believe they're...
I was referring to this bit. I know what you mean.
Yeah, and I think where they're going. So John Michael's coming over for our conference. If anybody wants to find out more, October the 19th, there's a conference. It's going to be a full day rather than 15 minutes of stuff to do with ITAD. But John Michael, who's one of the authors of 2883, is coming over to talk about it. So you're going to hear firsthand about the way that IEEE 2883 was put together. Picking up on your point, I think, as well, and Dan, getting your view on it, how difficult is it going to be to change perception, do you think, even if we do collectively market alternatives? Do you believe that people will listen?
I think if we get the right route to the people at the top in the government departments, then yes. Even with NCSC rewriting and updating IAS5 now, we're told it's going to be a guidance document, not a mandated document. So even then, what they say is not largely going to be able to comply with. So we don't necessarily have to follow that. So we have to get in there and talk to them and educate them about what is actually available, and what's commercially viable as well. Because you've got to take that into the scheme.
Yep.
It costs the ITAD industry thousands of pounds to get the necessary software infrastructure, which has to be passed on to the customers. So it's got to be commercially viable as well.
Agreed. We've gone over time, and I thought we would because it's a big topic, and we haven't really covered it in that much detail, I'll be honest. So I'm going to say thank you, Dan. Thank you, John. Gary, you've put a question up here. We have a government body that will only allow us to shred SSDs. They do not approve erasure. And I think that's right. That's just a specification, and that's their risk. That's their risk profile. If that's how they view it, there is a well, not with your shredder because I've tested the 2 mil output, but there is a risk if we're shredding SSDs, process control failure and inability to hit all the NAND cells. So it has to be done appropriately. I'd argue that you can sanitize SSDs, mainly because we know that the vast majority are encrypted at a hardware level. So once you take the chips off, you still can't access data. So all of this, there's a much bigger debate to go on about this. I'm going to say thank you very much. There's a call to action. So I'm going to be looking down after our meeting today when we signed off on the ADESA changes specification. I'm going to go straight back in and I'm going to be looking for volunteers to talk about how we can introduce new specifications into the UK market space. Do it collectively. Make sure that the independence aspect of it is maintained. But to see if we can control the narrative and see if we can help our customers become more accurate in their specifications. So I'll be asking if anybody wants to take part, ping me an email, steve.mellings@adisa.global. Hopefully you'll know me anyway. But thanks, John. Thanks, Daniel. Sorry it's gone on, everybody.
No
We've
problem.
talked a bit too much. And if you guys can stay on, we'll have a chat afterwards. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much indeed, guys.